Okay, welcome back, guys. This time we're going to be talking about primers, surfacers, sealers, all that stuff. And generally, there's just I'm going to go over three kind of different setups. One of them I'm actually just going to kind of mention, but I wouldn't advise it. Then the other two, both are extremely viable options. Either one, I'll say that I would choose one of the other two. And I have my favorite, and I'll explain why. But so first, we're going to start off with epoxy. There's just no reason to use it. They're 25 years ago or whatever. Yeah, one, it was what they had technologically available, and then it also had lead in the paint, or it may have, hell, 25 years isn't that long. It may have been before that, but anyway, when they started taking all the lead out of all the products, that included epoxy. So what was once a great product for bare metal, I feel like there's better choices. If you're spending any time in any forums or doing any kind of research or anything like that, epoxy's probably going to come up. And you can get it to work. But it just I don't see any reason for it. It's a non-sanding. It's not meant to be sanded. When I was one of the brands that I used was the PPG LF series, which LF is lead free, but it says right there on the can non-sanding primer or non-sandable primer or something like that. But it just there's just no reason to be using it. You know what I'm saying? It just there's systems in place for a reason now, far superior to anything from the epoxy era. You'll hear these stories of 20 coats of lacquer and this and that and the other and stuff, and it just the game has changed. It's way less labor intensive. The product itself does a lot of the work instead of you doing so much work. It just personally, there's very very little call, in my opinion, in a body shop for epoxy primer. Now, the one thing that I will say about epoxy primer is that it's very good for, like, if you're being real precise with your restoration. And you'll notice, and you can still see some of this on new cars now. If you pull up like the carpet in the trunk or something like that, and you're going to see then it's primer. You'll find some spot on the car, whether you look up underneath the package tray or whatever, but you're going to find a mixture of kind of like paint, primer, overspray. That is about the only use I can possibly think of for epoxy. Is just where you're going to apply a primer that you're not going to cover, or it's not going to get completely covered. It does have good holdout, as far as it's going to do a good job at blocking out moisture and stuff like that. But as far as the utility aspect of it, it doesn't sand. It doesn't sand well. If you try to sand, it's going to just gum up your paper unless you're water sanding. It just, I don't know. And this isn't me, just talking. I literally spent 4 years struggling with a few different primers because the shop just demanded we use the stuff, and I'm like, I'd already been painting for several years, and I'm just like, why? It just didn't make no sense. The adhesion isn't as good as the products I'm fixing to mention. So this isn't something where I read an article and then come to the conclusion. This is my because I was really trying to make this product work, because I was always fighting it as far as trying to get the results that I wanted, pre-paint. And you can make it work, and if somebody gave it to you, I guess, I don't know, you're only going to save. I would buy the cheapest urethane primer before I would try and use the most expensive epoxy. Things may have changed. Epoxy may be a little more modernized, but there's no reason to. There's no reason to step outside of the urethane system anymore. They have everything covered. I would stay within the way things work now. You know what I mean? There's just no reason outside of, like I said, if you're trying to match a factory finish to where you're going to be able to see the paint or see the primer and it's not going to be covered, I would use it then, because one, it does look good. Epoxy lays down real good, and then it also is going to have a better holdout than, say, a urethane primer surfacer, as far as moisture and any type of you know, extremely moist conditions, or handling it with your hands or something like that. So anyway, that's epoxy. You know, I, I don't really have a whole lot to say about it. I mean, you can ask questions about it, and I'll be like, I don't know why would you want to? So anyway, let's move on. So when I started in around '95, when I started in paint and body, it was, and it's pretty much still the same today. I mean, some areas are slowly transgressing to waterborne, and actually to be, you know, compliant and stuff like that. They're forcing you to switch to waterborne, but for the most part, in my area, I live in Missouri. Unless you're in a larger city or something like that, waterborne hadn't really hit the market super strong yet. And I don't know a ton about it. I have used some, but I don't know enough to tell you much about that. But you know, so it's like urethane is it. I mean, that's the way to roll. I mean, a base coat, clear coat urethane system is, at this point, is the best product and finish. And again, I mean, you can jack around with a lacquer or something, and yes, you can make it look good. You can't make it look better. I guarantee you, I can make a base clear look just as good as anybody can, a single stage or a lacquer or whatever. But you can make it look as good. But you know, it's going to die. It's like lacquer, even the catalyzed lacquer have a tendency to eventually start doing checking, and you get all these crow's feet and stuff in it. This stuff here is made to last for, like, you know, urethane is made to last forever. I mean, it's durable, tough, good stuff. So personally, like I said, I would stay away from the epoxy. So the next step would be, you know, into the urethane system, like I mentioned. And in '95, when I came into it, there was just the standard deal was an etching primer, and then the etching primer actually has an acid that you'll mix. You know, you'll get your primer, like if you used to buy a quart of primer, and you're going to buy a quart of, I believe most companies call it an activator, but it's pretty much just a bottle of acid. And because I've actually used it to remove rust off of bolts and stuff before. But anyway, I wouldn't recommend that. But it's usually a 1-to-1 in my experience from the 4 or 5 different etching primers that I've used. It's a 1-to-1 where you've got your primer, and then you've got your acid. The acid will, you know, if it's true blue, what it's supposed to be, it'll either be in a glass or a plastic container, because it would actually eat its way through a typical paint can. And they mix 1-to-1. You spray it on. Most of the time, it's like a medium coat. It's not something, you're not going for coverage. It's almost just like a mid coat between your bare metal and your surfacer, or whatever you're going to be using on top of it. But it creates that adhesion because the lead's gone, and they knew that they needed to bridge that gap. So they came up with an acid-based primer, and the acid will etch into the metal, but the primer part sticks to your surfacer. So therefore, it created that bond, because they knew the adhesion was not there anymore for epoxy. And it was never, you know, you'd still have to use lacquer or something that sanded it. It just don't go there. So anyway, that would be probably, you know, I do something a little different now, but this would probably be the for most people that, you know, if you don't have very much experience and you don't, you know, this is going to be where you can just kind of walk into your local paint store and be like, yeah, I'm painting my car, I need some this and that, you know, and there's going to be a system that has all these within it, whether it's PPG or DuPont or Diamond or Sikkens, Glazert, whatever it is. There will be something in that paint system, or there'll be actually a whole paint system within that. And I don't say you necessarily have to stay with the system, but I would stay within a urethane system. So, you know, you can buy sometimes the cheaper stuff, and people frown on it, but guys, I've used tons, and actually here locally, there's a few more shops that I talk to on a pretty regular basis, and they use the cheaper. Like I use a lot of Nason, believe it or not. And people just, oh, it's crap. It's like I get quality results, you know what I mean? And I mean, it's like the car that I'm putting back together now. I painted it, over a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago. It could have even been longer than that. And there's no dieback in this car. I haven't done like an actual final polish, But yeah, there's no dieback, there's no haze, the car still looks great, and it's gonna look even better once it's, because I like to go back around and kind of nib and look it over and stuff. Once the car is pretty much finished, then I'll go back and kind of spot buff and polish and stuff like that to go ahead and bring out the rest of the gloss. But yeah, it looks great. It's been like a year and a half, no dieback, no nothing like that. And I mean, that's, you know, the proof's in the pudding. So anyway, that would be your second option, is just doing a etching primer, and then you're going to put your urethane surfacer on top of that. And then this is, again, some people will argue and they'll say this step is, oh man, that's a hacker or whatever. You need to put a urethane sealer on top of that urethane surfacer. It's a wet on wet, so it's going to be, once you're in the booth or in your shop or whatever, and once you're spraying your car, your first coat needs to be that, or usually it's just one coat, but that first coat needs to be that urethane sealer, because it has a higher binder content than the surfacer. The surfacer is more porous to make it more sandable, and then the sealer gives it better holdout. And it's not going to take any more time, very little more. It's one time around the car is how much time it takes to use this other product. But then you have that holdout, and it actually, then the sprayable product, once it's as a sealer, a urethane sealer, actually that sprayable product has pretty much characteristics of an epoxy. The same things, the benefits I said about the epoxy with the higher binder content and everything. A urethane sealer pretty much falls in line. I mean, you could probably spray them, you know, if the color was the same, you could probably spray them side by side, and even somebody who knew what they were doing, maybe a little more mil thickness, I guess, on the urethane. But typically you can make, urethane sealer lays down really good, just like epoxy, and then that's what you would lay your base coat upon. And you know, depending on the color, like yellow or something like that, a lot of times you'll tint your sealer, because yellow, there's been times where I've had to put 10 or 12 coats of yellow on. You know, it just doesn't cover well without some type of ground coat to kind of make up that difference. And then there's some red, you know, some weird pearly reds and stuff that do kind of do that same thing. Chevrolet has one called Garnet Red, and that it may have changed now, but back in the 90s, and you know, I mean, literally it could take 7, 8, 10 coats, and this is a 3-coat base coat system, you know, so you should be done in 3 coats, and literally 7 or 8 coats of this stuff before it would actually be covered. So it's kind of good to go ahead and put some kind of ground coat, even a close red within that system, but you know that covers well. You know, then you could put a coat or two of that on, and then you've got 80% of it covered, and then all you got to do is change the color, and then you can use your more transparent color just to change the color to what you want it to be. But most of the time, just 3 coats of whatever you got. I mean, most reds cover really good. Yellows typically do not cover well. But so anyway, that would be your second option. So we've talked about epoxy. We've talked about using a etching primer, and then you're going to use a primer, urethane primer surfacer. And this is prep work. Now, like I said, that primer, you know, the primer sealer, the urethane sealer, that's going to be when you're actually spraying. And this video is just about the prep work point of trying to get your car ready to paint. So at this point, like I said, you know, it's just etching primer onto the bare metal, and then your surfacer urethane primer surfacer onto your etching primer, and that's going to create the adhesion. It's also going to give you a very, you know, very good surface, pleasant to work with, will shape and block well, and it, you know, I've changed recently, but I've used it for years, and I wouldn't hesitate to use it again. I just like what I'm doing better now. Which is the third one is using a polyester, sprayable polyester. Right now I'm using Evercoat makes it. It's called High Build, I believe. They used to have one called Featherfill. I tried it. I hated it. It was really not very user friendly. It got hard in your gun quick. You had to have a really big tip in your gun, like 2.2 or something. It was ridiculous. But this, I actually use my regular primer gun. I think it's either a 1.7 or a 1.7 or 1.8 tip, but it sprays good out of it. Don't lay down like slick as glass, but again, I mean, it's a polyester, sprayable polyester. And the beauty of this is because your filler, your body filler that's on your actual panel is polyester. So you can see that we have the chemical makeup is going to be close to the same. So you know, it just kind of makes sense to try and stay within that realm as much as possible. So you have your polyester body filler all finished and ready to go, and then you come over and I treat it. I probably am not following the directions. I've tried different ways. I will spray it on there, and then I treat it just like a glaze coat. Like, you know, if you do your mud work with a higher, you know, like with a heavy filler, it's going to be more porous, it's going to sand better, and it's actually going to have like more, you know, more resilience at a thicker, you know, which you don't really want to be thick in any of it. I mean, that's what you're striving to do, is keep all this stuff as thin as possible. But in theory, it would hold up better at a thicker, because it just is more porous, so it's going to have a little more flexibility. It's going to be able to hold up in a thicker, you know, if it's being used in you know, a scenario to where it needs to be a little thicker. That's why they have the high build. And then you've got the glaze, which doesn't, it sands good if you catch it at the right time, especially like if you go like with the metal glaze. Really good product. But man, if you let that stuff set overnight or something like that, I mean, good grief, it goes back. It like sands like epoxy. I mean, it's really hard to sand, gums up your paper. But you know, if you give it 20 minutes to half an hour and then get on it and sand it, then it sands really well. And it's mostly made for filling deeper scratches, you know, and pinholes and stuff like that. But anyway, that's kind of what I do with the sprayable polyester. Is now it's like, it's a 4-to-1 product, and generally you can put on 3 to 4 coats and it sticks to bare metal. So I mean, there is no, you know, and I've tested it. I mean, because I was like, you know, I had that in my head. I'm like, you know, without etching primer, what do you mean it's going to stick to bare metal? I mean, I haven't dove into the science of that or nothing. You know, I just test things now. I don't. People tell you things, and a lot of it's just very misleading. So I just test things, and I tested this, and it has great adhesion as long as you have you know, mechanical, some type of mechanical scratch there, which 80 grit DA or whatever you've used to prep the panel. But yeah, it sticks good. I mean, you know, I was kind of worried about that, and I was like, but it doesn't say to use an etching primer. And actually, if you use an etching primer like under body filler, it actually can cause failure. They're like, no, you want bare metal for polyester body fillers. So I just assume it's along the same lines as far as, you know, the adhesion of a body filler, which, you know, you can get away with some deeper scratches, you know, but you know, the filler sticks pretty good, you know, even, you know, with just an 80 grit scratch, and so does this primer surfacer. So anyway, for a quick rundown, this is actually the 4th time I made this video, so I'm not going to ramble on, because that's why I've made so many videos, because they've been too long. But as a rundown, epoxy, you know, I gave you my take on it. I can't really find a use of it in this modern day and age. But like I said, if you're just going to spray something and it's going to be exposed to the atmosphere, then the epoxy would probably be either epoxy or a urethane sealer, not the urethane surfacer, because it's too porous to be exposed to the atmosphere. But we had the epoxy, then we had the etching primer, surfacer. You know, spray your surfacer over your etching primer, and then the surfacer is what you'll be sanding and blocking on. I highly recommend that. It's great. You know, that as far as within the system and stuff, I really like it. And then we've also got what I do with the high build with a sprayable polyester primer, and I treat it like a glaze, like I said. You know, and I literally I'll use 80. Block it with 80 just like I would body filler, and then I'll guide coat it, and then I'll come back with 180, and then I'll use the urethane surfacer over that, because it's less porous, and then it also goes back into being within the system. So you have polyester, then urethane for the rest of the voyage. You'll be using urethane. So anyway, hopefully that made sense to you guys. If you get any questions, be sure to post them below. I'm happy to help you guys, and you know, feel free. You know, mention what kind of car you're working on or whatever. You know, I'd like to hear about it, and and see how it's going for you. And hopefully these videos are helping you. If you got any ideas or suggestions as far as future videos, if you have a problem that you're trying to deal with right now, just let me know, and I'll try to either answer your question, or I'll make another video, or we can even, depending on schedules and stuff, we can even Skype or phone or whatever, and I'll try to help you out. But anyway, that's it for now, guys. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you soon.